you doing tonight? Well, I gotta tell you, I am wicked thrilled to be back in Pittsfield, Maine, and I also want you to be aware that I am a full-service humorist. So, with that in mind, I stopped and got this at the store on the way over here, and it says 33% more, 8 ounces at the 6-ounce price. So I'm going to leave this right over here. If they get too bad, come up and grab it and pass it around, all right? We don't want to disturb it.
I put a jacket on and
That'll be nice.
nice breeze. Yeah.
Everybody hear me all right now? Yeah. Adding out or anything. Albums. Perfectly.
Yeah.
Fine. Well, here we are, Pittsfield, Maine, and what better place to be in the whole universe than the great state of Maine? Especially like my Uncle Dale used to say, why go away when you're already here? We got everything you need right here in the state of Maine, as noted in this tomb. China, Paris, Norway. Well, they're right outside your doorway, state of Maine. And up in Poland we go strolling, and with candle pins we're molded, state of Maine. Down at the Elks Club, we play bingo on the lawn, a pink flamingo, state of Maine. We drink beer, but never sherry on the Vinyl Haven Ferry in state of Maine. And in the summer, we got tourists, and they imitate the tourists, but their money spends the same. We sell them little trinkets from Korea, authentic souvenirs of state of Maine. And this is what we do. I don't know if you are aware of this fact, folks, but in my lifetime, tourism in the state of Maine has exploded to a level that nobody would have believed when I was just a kid, just in my lifetime. I don't know if you're aware of this, but right now in 2019, tourism is the second largest industry in the entire state. Worm digging is still number one, but it's neck and neck, okay? And just in my lifetime, there has developed an entire department down to Augusta, the Maine Department of Tourism. There's a whole department down there. It's a select group of folks from Massachusetts, and they sit down and they try to figure out how to attract people to the state of Maine by spending all our tax dollars to drag people to the state of Maine. And I wish they would just get one native Mainer on the Department of Tourism, because any native Mainer can tell you, you don't have to spend all that money, all right? Because there's only a handful of things that people ever want to do when they come to the state of Maine. And frankly, it's the same things that they wanted to do 50 years ago, probably 100 years, for all I know, 200 years ago. I can tell you what they are, okay? They want to see a lighthouse. I don't know either, but they do. I guarantee it. No, I'm not kidding. You want to develop northern Aroostook County? Put a lighthouse every few miles up 95, they would be jammed. And I'm not kidding, they'd be jammed into Holton. They've got to see a lighthouse. They've got to eat a lobster. You haven't been to Maine, you haven't eaten a lobster, and for some bizarre reason that I have never been able to comprehend, they have got to see a moose. Have you noticed this? You get folks from away, they come into the Bangor airport, they get off the plane, they get out, they expect the baggage handlers, you know, down. The average visitor to Maine in the summer, okay, if they were sitting in front of a lighthouse, eating a lobster, and a moose walked by, it would blow their mind. But there's one other experience that I personally believe that virtually every visitor to the state of Maine wants to have this experience. Now, it could be a conscious desire, that's possible, Not likely, chummy, but it's possible. But much more likely, it's a subconscious thing. See, it's an urge. You ever have one of them? Oh, it's just an urge. You have this urge, and you don't know why you want to do it. You just want to do it. It's an urge. And this is what happens. These folks coming from away, they get the state of Maine, they get behind the wheel of a car, they're driving down the back roads of Maine until they come upon a little country store. They want to park the car, get out of the car, walk across the road, walk up the steps of that store, and have some cranky old geezer say to them, "You can't get there from here." That is what they want. That's the urge. Why don't we have a geezer training program down there? Why not? Come on. You know as well as I do, we got a load of them around. And, and a lot of them would work pretty cheap. Put them out on every street corner. We only got 3 months to make 12 months worth of income. Get them out there. But of course, there's one other thing they all want to do is to learn to talk like a real Downeaster. They can't, but believe me, I've made a lot of money trying to teach them. And here's the thing. See, they get all fixated on dropping the R's. And, yes, that's part of it. But anybody from any place can drop a few R's. It takes a native Mainer to throw a few extra R's in where none ever occurred in nature. All right? That's what this is about. We say Augusta, not Augusta. Don't say Buster, we say Buster. State of Maine. On the mountains we go shushing. We got whoopie pies and whoopie cushions in state of Maine. And all the girls who think you're awesome if you chug along your box and you never show the pain. So goodbye, I'll see you later. I'll be in the land of taters in state of Maine. I have to tell you, one of the fun things at this point in my career, okay, I just have to digress for a moment. I was talking to a few people, and as far as I can tell, the last time I did an outdoor, open to the public concert in Pittsfield, Maine was in 1979. 40 years ago, out here, they closed the street, it was the Egg Festival, and I played here with the Dubious Brothers, and I'll talk a little bit more later in the program about the Dubious Brothers. We had just finished our record, Finish Life at Home in Your Spare Time with the Dubious Brothers, but anyway, but that was the last time I was here, and all these years have gone by, they made all these records, but the thing that makes me laugh today, people come up to me, seriously, people on the street just come up to the road or something like that, and they say, "Where do you get your material?" I'm thinking, obviously, you're not paying attention. I mean, growing up in the state of Maine, like I did, and I grew up in a little town down on the coast, went to kindergarten and graduated from high school with the same 37 kids. You know these little towns where everybody knows everything about everybody. It's not accurate, but they know it. Well, that's how I grew up. And let me tell you something that I learned fast. The state of Maine, I guarantee you, has the highest CPSI index in the nation. Of course, what I'm talking about is characters per square inch. Okay? And there was a load of them. They was littering the ground around me growing up down the harbor. Now, here's a good example, is a fellow that I grew up with named Douglas Carter. And believe me, these are real people. I do not have to stretch any of this. If anything, I tone it down once in a while. But Douglas, I met Douglas Carter. He's a lobsterman down at the harbor. And I was just a kid. He was probably, at the time I met him, he was probably about 35 years old. and he looked like Clint Eastwood looks today. You know that look? That they're kind of wore down right to a nub early on? Well, he had that look. But let me tell you something. Back in them days, every license plate on every car in Maine, they all said vacation lane. And that's fine, but the trouble was, where the friction came in, was for people like Douglas, while these folks was on vacation, he was working. See, and there's a little bit of friction there. For instance, here's a good example. There's some rumors and mythology that floats around the state of Maine that I want to dispel here tonight. One of them is, if anybody tells you that it's a good idea to go down to the dock and dicker with the lobstermen over the price of lobsters, that's a bad idea. Okay, because they've been up from about 4 o'clock in the morning already working their fingers right to a bone. So Douglas was down the dock this one day. This fella in the, you know, the blue blazer and the salmon colored pants just got up and got his latte about 10 o'clock. He wanders over to Douglas. Douglas has already hauled 400 traps that day. And he's walking around the dock, comes up to Douglas, and he says, I couldn't help but notice there's a guy on the other side of the harbor selling his lobsters 10 cents a pound cheaper than what you're selling yours for here. And I just wonder if you might make a little accommodation for a fella. Well, Douglas didn't even bother to grace that with a response. He just reached in his pocket, dug in his pocket, got a dollar bill, handed it to the guy, and kept working. Well, the fellow looked at the dollar bill. He said, "What's that for?" Doug says, "I imagine that'll buy enough gas to get over the other side of the harbor and buy them discount lobsters." You're telling me. You don't want to mess around with these people. They got stuff to do. And here's the other thing. Some of you, I can see already, are old enough to remember. There was a fad. I want to say this lasted about a decade, from the mid-'70s to mid-'80s, so maybe around 75 to 85. But anyway, there was a chunk of time in Maine recent history, and I think the epicenter of this fad was probably Paramus, New Jersey. I'm not sure, but somewhere along there. And what it was, for about 10 years, it seems like everybody in New York and New Jersey and Pennsylvania thought it'd be the greatest thing since sliced bread to come to Maine and buy a lobster trap and drag it back home and put it on the lawn for a lawn launder. Do you remember that?
Yeah.
For about 10 years, you look on the Maine Turnpike, they were strapped on the roof and the hood and dragging them behind in the trailers, and everywhere was these wooden lobster traps. Well, right during the peak of that fad, Douglas was down mending some traps, and another fella come up. He's looking around, walks up to Douglas, and he says, "You know, I've been looking at these lobster traps, and I think that look awful sharp on my lawn down New Jersey, and I wonder how much you'd have to get, like, how much you want for that one right there?" Douglas glanced over, almost a brand new lobster trap. Well, he says, "I imagine I'd part with that for $50. Well, $50, 1978, that's a lot of money for a wooden lobster trap. The guy said, "Gee, that's a lot of money." Doug says, "Suit yourself." Well, it says, I'll just go keep looking around. Well, Doug went back to work. He looked around some more. Finally, he found an old beat-up trap off the corner of the dock. It's all covered with barnacles and stove up and old dried-up fish heads in there and stuff. He thought maybe he'd get a better deal on that one. He went back to Douglas, pointed up the beat-up trap, said, "How much you want for that one?" "Oh, that one?" Doug says, "I'd have to get $100 for that one." Doug says, "I don't get it. How come you're charging me twice as much for that old beat-up trap as you have for that brand new one?" Well, Doug says, "That's easy." He said, "Oh, an old beat-up trap, that belongs to me. I don't know who the hell owns that." But see, they're messing with you all the time. But of course, this was always a great source of raw material for me, because I had these people, as you know, I was on CBS television on the network for 11 years, but way before that, I did a whole bunch of TV specials with local affiliates, and these local NBC and PBS and CBS, I would, if you had a half-decent idea, they were all locally owned, see, back in them days. So if you had a half-decent idea, you could go work out a deal. So we made all these different television shows. And I always had an ace in the hole to go to, because I knew Elliot Winslow. Now, Elliot Winslow, the whole another generation older than Douglas, When I met Elliot, he was already, he must have been, oh, I don't know, 50 or 60 years old when I was a little kid. And he, just to give you an example of the kind of person we're talking about with Elliot Winslow, okay, Elliot passed away in July of 2006 at the age of 95. So he lived a good long life. But just to show you what we're talking about here, and this is not, nothing is made up here, this is the truth. The previous year, when he was 94, he was still in good health, but he rented the Pittsfield Opera House, downtown Booth Bay Harbor, put out a full paid ad in the Booth Bay Register, you know, kind of like the Pittsfield advertiser. 2 minutes of the best reading in Central Maine. But he put a full page ad in the Booth Bay Register, and he held a wake for himself. And everybody in town came. I think the building holds 800. They had almost 900. They was hanging off the rafters. And Elliot, at age 94, gets up, sits on the stage with the Boston Post cane, and proceeds to have everybody in the audience get up and say what they're going to say at his funeral, and then he corrects them. This guy, he's a real guy. So you can imagine, anytime I was doing a television special, or writing a book, or had a radio thing, anytime I needed the local color, I made a beeline for Elliot Winslow. So this was 1998, the last one of these things I did, because they all got sold to big out-of-state companies just shortly after that. It was the last one I did for WGME in Portland, and it was a great show. How's this for a concept? I talked him into this. I love this. What a job. I got a great job. I said, I borrowed a 68 Cadillac convertible from my friend John Lee, got a film crew from WGME, and we drove down Coastal Route 1 on the last weekend in June, and interview tourists about natives and natives about tourists. That's it. That's the whole show. And you know, in some states, that would not work. In Maine, it's a gold mine. Yeah. How can you miss when you got a place like the prison store in Thomasville? I ask, you know, we don't even have the prison there anymore, but we still got the prison store. See, that's the essence. That is all you have to know about what makes Maine humor, okay? It's just a little bit weird. It's not super duper weird. It takes a few minutes to figure out how weird it is. We pull up in front, and you know, this was a few years ago, but the prison store, the Main Street of Thomaston, is Route 1, coastal Route 1. And there's no sidewalks, and the store's right up, you know, if you stand there a few minutes, a Winnebago will take you right out. So we pulled up with the van with all the TV equipment, and I was standing out on the sidewalk talking to the guy that run the store, and they was unloading the stuff, and I happened to be looking in the picture window, and it's all stuff the prisoners make. It's all good. They make some bookcases and lamps and different things, and they get to make a little money, and you know, people get, it's all good. But I'm looking in the picture window, and right in the center there's a ship model, a four-masted schooner about that long, made out of toothpicks. Okay, you look at that, you realize the fellow was not in a rush. Okay, a little bit weird. And then I realized the name was Freedom's Way. Right about that time, the state trooper come by and said, you can't park here. You got to park in behind the prison store in the designated parking area. How many has ever parked behind the prison store? Oh, wait a minute. I should have mentioned this right up front. As we go along this evening, every now and then, I'm going to ask you a question, like, how many has parked behind the prison store, something like that. You got to realize, dear, when I ask some questions, I am not interested in the truth. Why should I care if you will? I just want to feel like you're with me, all right? So let's try that again. How many has parked behind the prison store?
Yeah!
How many was in Ethiopia last weekend? I don't care. Just try to hang on that concept, we'll do all right. But anyway, if you ever do, you know what the signs that tell you where to park, you know what they're made out of? license plates. Well, they were doing it anyway. You know, what do you want, Warden? No parking? Sure thing. You know, just a little bit weird. But I will say this. I am a Maine humorist, born and raised in Maine, proud to be a Mainer, but I do occasionally perform in the western states, New Hampshire and Vermont. And I have a recurring nightmare. Imagine for a moment you are driving around the back roads of New Hampshire. You get pulled over by a state trooper, they throw you in prison, you're doing 20 years to life for ripping the tags off mattresses or something. And the entire time you're in there, you're stamping out license plates that say live free or die. There's something elementally wrong with that, it's just wrong. But anyway, so we were making this TV special. We went to Thomaston, we went to Pemaquid Lake, all the tourist hotspots, but I had an ace in the hole because I knew where to find Elliot Winslow. Every summer, yes ma'am. We have a missing child in a plaid shirt.
Police are, no, there's no plaid shirt on. He's 10 years old, he's autistic, he has ADHD, he has a striped t-shirt on, it's dark gray, sweatpants. The police are out in full force. His name is Jaden. Very smart, very friendly. If you see him, just call the police department.
We will keep an eye out. Thank you very much, Jaden. No, that's all right. That's all right. Life intervenes. Well, anyways, as I said, so we were in the process of putting this show together, and I figured this would be a perfect opportunity to use Elliot Winslow. And fortunately, I knew exactly where and how to find Elliot Winslow, because every summer, from Memorial Day to Labor Day, Elliot was ensconced at the exact southern terminus of Route 27. Now, I don't know how much you know about the geography of the state of Maine, but Route 27 enters the state of Maine at the Coburn-Gore crossing. That's just at the Quebec border. Let me just tell you something. There's 2 border guards, about 5 million black flies, and no terrorists whatsoever. They go in some other way. They got their own border security in the black flies. So anyways, you come in 27, you come down through Carabasset Valley, you go through the middle of Kingsfield, go through Farmington, jag along Route 2, cut down through Belgrade Lakes Village. If in the old days the hermit would come out and steal your hubcaps on the way through, as you come down through Belgrade. You go across the Kennebec River in Augusta, go down the east side of the Kennebec till you get to Wiscasset. You've got to wait a long time in Wiscasset. Then you get down to Edgecombe, go through Edgecombe, through the middle of, through Booth Bay Harbor, and Route 27 ends on Southport Island, Maine. That is the end. Next stop, Portugal. So I knew that for the whole summer, if you were looking for Elliot Winslow, he would be at a lobster wharf called Robinson's Wharf, which is just on the eastern shore of Southport Island, Maine. You go over the Turnstile Bridge, which is actually run by the Bridge brothers, Wayne and Dwight Lewis. I went to high school with them. And you touch down on the eastern shore, and right there is one of these lobster wharfs, all right? You with me so far? That was a long trip down through the Coburn-Gore, but we're there. So I told the guys on the film crew, just make sure you've got your batteries charged and filming your camera, because I don't know what he's going to say, but it's going to be worth hearing. So we pull up. It was a beautiful, like this, blue skies, puffy white clouds, about 77 degrees, little sea breeze. One of the 7 days, you will sell everything you own, move to Maine, and wait for the other 6. But I walked up, I said, just make sure you got this going. And Elliot, he was a young man at the time, I think he was 83 or 84, and he was just sitting out on the picnic table. You know, these are just these basic lobster places where the tourists and the seagulls fight over the lobster rolls, and somehow the natives make an income off the whole affair. So Elliot was sitting out there, just sitting there with one arm as long as the other. And I sat down, they got the cameras rolling, and And I said, well, Elliot, how's your summer going? He says, terrible, Ted. Terrible. And I forgot, you never ask a Maine merchant, how is your summer going, right in the actual summer itself.
Yeah.
You try it. It doesn't matter which summer, it doesn't matter which decade. Trust me, they're all having a bad summer. Doesn't matter. Now, after Labor Day, they declare half of it and go to Florida with the other half, but right there in the summer. So he said, no, terrible. I said, what seems to be the trouble, Elliot? Oh, he said, the month of June was foggy. So foggy, they couldn't see the food on their plate. He says, we learned an important lesson. I said, what's that, Elliot? He says, they won't eat if they can't see the food on their plate. He says, we ain't even going to make our light bill this month. I said, now look, Elliot, you're being a little extreme. I said, you've got 4th of July weekend coming up. You got all of July. You got all of August. I'm sure you'll make plenty of money then. He says, if we do, we won't mention it. Well, I could see I was getting him cranked up, and I was trying to see if he might have some stories about asking directions. That's a big part of the Maine storytelling canon, is these stories about asking directions. I said, that ever happen? Oh, yes, said I. Oh, yeah, he says, I remember. Might have been about 10 years back. Peak tourist season, anyways. Tourists were swarming around worse than the Black Lives that year. And he says, I was numbing around out in the parking lot, helping them park, and I happened to notice this little car pull over the corner of the parking lot. Out-of-state plate, little sports car, two fellas in there having quite an argument, yelling back and forth. I didn't pay much attention. By and by, they drove off. Well, then about a half hour later, they was back. This time, they parked the car, turned off the engine, dug in the trunk, got the road map, and started arguing over the road map. They were pointing and hollering and yelling over the road map. And then they put the road map away, cranked up the car again, headed off again. Took them the better part of an hour to get back that time. And at that point, I thought perhaps they could use a little intervention. Well, I went over and I said, you fellas lost, are ya? Well, they said yes. He said, you trying to get off of Southport Island, are ya? Well, they said, yes, we are. He said, you trying to get off of Southport Island by driving west? Well, they said, that is precisely what they've been doing. He said, that's your trouble right there. He says, you can't get off of Southport Island by driving west. If you was to do it, you would be the first ones that's ever done it. He says, take a tip from an old timer that's lived around here his whole life. You want to get off of Southport Island? You're going to take that car of yours, turn it 180 degrees, head it in an easterly direction, and drive back across the same bridge you come across to get onto the island in the first place. Well, they said, we didn't come across no bridge. Elliot says, oh, he says, I take it back. Your trouble is you ain't here yet. But here's the thing. A lot of people are under the impression, I'm sure you're not among them, that this snappy answers, these quick one-liners, are just something that happens along the coast in the summertime. No, this is all over the state of Maine. 1976, I moved to Palmyra, Maine. I lived out on the Raymond Road. It was a dirt road then, most of the year, mud for significant stretches, clay or ice, but mostly dirt. Moved in right next door to Blinky Pinker, one of the greatest geezers ever produced in the state of Maine. And I must tell you, when I say geezers, I am not being sexist, okay? But we have geezettes. Okay, I used to go over when remember when Barry's Pharmacy was on Main Street over here? I had my art studio right down over the Montgomery Ward store, and I'd go up there and have coffee, and I was in there one morning, and two ladies having tea, just sitting there talking, and I wasn't paying any attention, it just happened over here. And one of them said, did you hear where Elmira Perkins passed away last night? The other one said, yes, I heard, and I'm not the slightest bit interested. I never cared for it, and I won't talk about it no more. The other one says, well, she says, you are going to go to a funeral, aren't you? Nope, she says, she ain't coming to mine, I ain't going to hers. we do have geezettes, and I run into them, but Blinky, when I moved in, Blinky lived right down the road. Right next door. Next trailer over. About 8.5 miles. You could always tell Blinky's place. It was set way back in off the road. See? And there was an oak tree right up alongside the driveway with a limb sticking out over the driveway, and hanging off that limb there was a 225 slant 6 Dodge engine block. Now that's not that uncommon around these parts, but you know every time you see something like that, there's got to be a story behind it, right? You just don't know what the story is, but I happen to know. Blinky told me what happened. He says originally when he hung it up there, the Whipple boys over to Newport was going to do a valve job. One of them took a course. Well, it turned out it was a 48-week correspondence course off the back of a matchbook cover, and they was only in the 3rd week. And I don't know if you know the Whipple boys, but they never was the sharpest tools in the shed anyway. They did have one overarching talent. They could tear stuff apart at an ungodly rate. They could rip stuff apart like nobody's business. Then they kind of bogged down considerable. So they tore all the parts out of that engine. Once you know, right at that moment, it started raining something wicked. They retired to Blinky's trailer, consumed a vast quantity of beer, and by the time they come out, about 6 days later, that engine block was rusted right shut, froze up like a block of maple. But I'm here to tell you that there is a phenomenon in the state of Maine, and I've traveled all over the country. I've never seen it anywhere except the state of Maine, and it's virtually a metaphysical phenomenon. And what it is this: you will notice, you look around, you'll see what I'm talking about. In the state of Maine, if you leave something out in the yard for a certain amount of time, let's say a week, it starts to look natural. And after 2 weeks, you feel you have no right to frig around with that at all, really. You'd be messing with the feng shui of the yard. So that's still out there to this day, as far as I know. But Blinky was a master of the snappy answer. He had the ability to come up with them one-liners. And sometimes that's associated with a hard life, and he had a hard life. When I met him, he was 93 years old, and he had been known to take a drink on a pretty regular basis. Frankly, you might even say Blinky was the town drunk. But Palmyra was so small, everybody kind of took turns. But he did have numerous quite obvious examples of what you could only refer to as impaired judgment. For one thing, like I say, he was 90-something when I first met him, and he had been married and divorced 5 different times to 5 different women, right? And every one of them women, when they divorced Blinky, he never seen it coming, just like a 2x4 right upside the head. They all took every penny he had, flat broke, down to the last penny, and that happened 5 times. 5 times. And he had a good job at the axe handle factory in El Hill, still there. Well, that was still up there. Well, I asked him, I said, Blinky, gee, that's a rough track record. A man your age, with that kind of track record, you suppose you're going to get married again? He says, no, Timmy, I don't believe I will. He says, I think I'll just find a woman I don't like and buy her a new house. So he had that ability to come up with a snappy answer. But I got to tell you something. It's very easy to get lulled into a false self-confidence about these people, because you think these geezers, you think you're going to get ahead of them. You're never ahead of them. Okay, I'll give you an example. Blinky, once a year, right out, he goes for an annual physical. He went into Hathorn, the nearest major city, and he'd go see the doctor right after mud season, before the mosquitoes hit big. You get around pretty good for a few days. And he went in to see the doctor. Doctor says, how you doing, Blinky? He says, I've been better, but it costs more. He said, if I'd have known I was going to live this long, I'd took a lot better care of myself. Well, Doc got out his pad, and started asking questions. He said, I'm going to ask you a few questions, Blake. He said, go right ahead. I got no pressing engagement. Well, he says, now, are you getting any exercise? My older patients, they don't get the exercise, stiffen up, it ain't good for them. Oh, he said, don't worry about that. I walk into town 2-3 times a week to get the mail, better part of 6-7 miles round trip. Well, Doc wrote that down. He said, that's wonderful, really. A man your age, I'm impressed. He says, now what about, sleep? He says, my older patients don't sleep. Their nerves get frazzled up, and that ain't good for them. Oh, he said, don't worry about that. Sleep like a baby dog. You'd have to set off a nuclear bomb outside my trailer just to wake me up some morning. He said, oh, that's terrific, terrific. He said, now some of these questions are a little bit personal, but I have to ask them. You go right ahead, ain't nothing I ain't heard. Well, he says, Blinky, are you regular in a habit? You know, some of my older patients ain't regular and it fouls them up something fierce. Oh, he said, don't worry about that either, Doc. No problem in that department. 7:30 every morning, just like clockwork. Doc says, that's marvelous. Man, your age, that's marvelous. Blinky says, it ain't that marvelous. I don't generally get up till 8 o'clock. You think you're getting ahead of them, but you are never getting ahead of them. And people will ask me, where do you find these geezers? Where do you locate these folks? I said, the first thing you've got to do is find their native habitat. And that, I am sad to say, is a dwindling natural resource in the 21st century. What you're looking for is a store, not a fuel plaza, not a mini mall. If it has clean restrooms, if it has any restroom, just keep looking. What you're looking for is a little clambed building. Oh, the train's going on. There you go. Nice to see you. Nice to see you today. You're looking for a little clambed building and a little porch out front, tin sign across the top, just says the store. Pepsi, Pepsi. And if you're fortunate, there'll be a few shotgun pellets kind of punctuating that. Now, if you go in one of them stores, you are inevitably going to run into a gaggle of geezers just sitting there, one arm as long as the other. Now, here's the tip. If you walk in the store and there's a gaggle of geezers having a conversation, do not leap right into that conversation. Okay? They're laying for you. And they ain't got nothing but time. And frankly, they seen you coming last summer. So Blinky and the boys was in there, and they was talking about how bad the winter was the year before. Of course, the thing is, in the summer, they talk about how bad the winter was the year before. In the winter, they talk about the black flies and the tourists. So it all kind of, the Red Sox get in there somewhere. But they was having this conversation, and any geezer worth their salt, they got antennae, they can tell if somebody's from away at about 600 paces. So this car pulled up, and Blinky's antenna was buzzing, and sure enough, some fellow with out-of-state plates, a great big car, with a foreign make, a Cadillac, I don't know if you've seen that, but that's like Dodge Dart. Fellow got out, and he walked in. Now, see, you ought to understand, any of these stores, that they're really just basic. They don't have a lot of fancy inventory. They just got the basics of rural Maine life, the necessities. Shotgun shells, Playboy air fresheners, duct tape, bungee cords, WD-40, pickled eggs. Huh? Don't you love them, huh? I don't even think you can have sell a lottery ticket if you ain't got that prominently displayed in your store. It's a jar about that big around, about that high, about half full of that murky looking water. There's usually a couple of business cards or notes taped on there, solid fill wanted, something like that. There's about 2 of them eggs floating in there. And you stamp on the floorboards and they jiggle a little bit. Yeah, it brings to mind a lot of uncomfortable questions. Okay, who ate the last egg? In what year? What do you suppose they used to fish them out with? And what was they doing just before that? All right? I'll just tell you something. If I was starving right to death on a desert island and I crawled up over a sand dune and I spied a jar of them pickled eggs, I would turn right around and crawl the other way. So, but they was in there. This fellow walked in. If he'd been smart, he would just walk down the counter, got an Uncle Henry's and a Moxie and a whoopie pie and left. But no, he heard him talking about the weather. He couldn't resist. He walked up and he says, boys, I couldn't help overhearing you were talking about how bad the weather is in the state of Maine. I got to tell you, I come to the state of Arkansas. We got something in Arkansas that's worse than anything you've ever seen in the state of Maine, worse than any black ice and nor'easters and 40 below. Well, Blinky perked right up. Live bait in the store. And he said, what might that be you got down to Arkansas? Oh, he says, down to Arkansas, we got the Arkansas tornado. You ain't seen the Arkansas tornado, you ain't seen nothing. Well, Blinky says, I beg to differ. He said, we got something in the state of Maine just as bad or worse than any Arkansas tornado ever thought of me. Oh, says, what's that? Blinky says, a Maine divorce. Well, the fellow says, oh, wait a minute, I don't see the slightest similarity between an Arkansas tornado and a Maine divorce. Blinky says, I don't imagine you do, but I can tell you from personal experience, either way you lose your trailer pretty darn fast. You're never getting ahead of them. But a lot of folks are not familiar with the fact that before I moved to Palmyra, before any of that, I was, before I become a wicked famous Maine humorist, I had quite a career as a singer-songwriter in a bunch of different groups around the state, down on the coast really, because that's where I grew up. And of course, the most famous one was the Dubious Brothers. And like I say, we had an album, Finish Life at Home in Your Spare Time, with the Dubious Brothers. And but whenever we played in Old Orchard Beach, they always called us the Dubois Brothers. They still gave us the $50. I believe it was $37.90 American. But you have to understand, this was a much different time. This was this was half a century ago. To tell you the truth, I hate to admit that, but it is. And Maine was very different back then. Some of you might be old enough to remember, it used to be, for one thing, tourist season used to end right at Labor Day. Yeah. That was the end of tourist season. All the tourists left that day. To wave goodbye on the turnpike, they left. All the Mainers that made any money went to Florida the next day. And the rest of us went inside the trailer, put the duct tape on the inside of the door, and waited for mud season. There had nothing tapering off. They had not invented all these tourist season extenders like B&Bs and Beef Peeping and all that stuff. Hadn't even come in yet. It was instant desperation. But we had friends that would kind of encourage us. And sometimes, the more they ask, the more you think about it, the more confused you get. I don't know if you have this experience, but people would come up to us, our friends, they say, well, you know what you ought to do in the wintertime. We said, no, we haven't got a clue. They said, well, you ought to go inland. Okay, we did not know much, but we knew a little bit. And this is what you know if you have grown up on the coast of Maine about going inland in the wintertime. This is all I knew. You go inland, the further inland you go, the fewer people, the more snow, and the less money. Am I right? Basically, in a general way. We figured if we went far enough inland in the winter, we'd run into two guys in a snowbank playing strip food stamps, and somehow that did not strike us as a great career move, say. So we said, why do we want to go inland? They said, don't you know? I said, we don't know. They said, well, you go up far enough inland, you're going to run into Ski Mountain. We said, yes. Why do we want to do that? They said, don't you? I said, assume we don't know. If you go up to Ski Mountain, you're going to run into the ski crowd. We said, who are they? They said they drive Porsches. I couldn't even get a mental picture what that would even look like. I mean, the whole thing got more confusing by the minute, but when you got nothing to lose. So we gassed up the Econoline, headed her inland, and run out of gas in Kingfield, Maine. And I don't know if you know where Kingfield is, but it's about 25 miles this side of the actual ski area. And back then, believe me, it might just as well have been 25,000 miles. We did get us a job in Kingfield. It was not the classiest joint in Kingfield, I'll say that. We played 6 weeks there 1 month. And I don't know if it was us or the place we was performing. I can't tell you what it was, but I can tell you this. We played all one winter in Kingfield, Maine, and never encountered one single solitary member of the ski crowd. Not one. They didn't even stop in to ask directions. But I want to tell you something, chummy. We run head on into the skidder crowd. Okay? And that's another crew altogether. Now, we're here in Pittsfield, Maine. I think we can probably assume, I can assume, that you know what I'm talking about when I say a skidder. Okay, because I was in New York City one time, years ago, me, a guy from Maine, I was doing a show in New York City, and somebody tried to tell me after the show that they make skidders in a factory. I said, not likely, chummy. I said, they don't make nothing in no factory that's got 3 different sizes of wheels on it. When I say skidder, what I'm referring to is a homemade vehicle, okay, which is constructed out of the parts of the other vehicles that was already out behind the trailer when you bought the trailer in the first place. See, every trailer sold in the state of Maine comes with a starter kit for a skidder. Okay? You might have to dig around, look under the blue top, pick up the plywood. It's out there. You've got to do a little research. If you're fortunate, you can start with a chassis off of a Bronco or a Blazer or an International Harvester. If you're in Vermont, you can use a Subaru, but the point is, that's just the starting point. And you get out, you get the chassis out, you jack that puppy up, you get your cutting torch, you get your MIG welder and your TIG welder, you start putting parts from Gremlins and Fairlanes and Falcons and Coronets and Hyundais until you get it up to a certain height. In the state of Maine, I believe, it's 14 feet 6 inches. And then you can jumpstart it with a space heater. And now actually, this, you hear in the press and the newspapers, magazine articles, they talk about sport utility vehicles and crossover vehicles and multi-purpose vehicles. A skidder is a single-purpose vehicle. Okay, it's for one thing, and one thing only, something that we in the state of Maine refer to as working in the woods. Okay? It's simple. You get your skidder running, that's about 98% of it. You take 2 weeks off. Then you get her going in your yard. You drive out onto the paved road. You drive along the paved road until you see a woods road off to one side. You with me so far?
Yeah.
Drive down the woods road. You junk along a bunch of ruts and stuff until you see a pile of logs over there. You back your skidder up the log, take the chain fall off the back of the skidder, buckle off that puppy, push him out of there, drive her back out to the paved road, unhook the chain, go to the beer store, come back, and that's the entire thing, okay? But so it was pretty clear from the get-go that we was only going to be entertaining for the skidder crowd. And so we realized that, well, first of all, these were good boys. They were good boys. And when I say boys, again, I'm not being sexist, but we were there all winter. And I observed the skidder crowd at close quarters, and I can tell you there are at least 2 things I observed. First, okay, it was pretty much at the bottom of the now agenda. But it was a very interesting demographic group. For one thing, there was only 2 body styles. You had your slimline model. I'm talking skinny. Them guys could run around a rainstorm, not get wet. And Adam Zappa weighed about 8 pounds, bobbling under there. And far more popular was the heavy-duty model. Most of them fellas would dress up 275 or better. But either way, it didn't matter. They had an outfit. It might well just been like a uniform. Okay, it started at the top, had a cap with the brim sticking out, not sideways, not backwards, always sticking out straight, and scrunch right in the center. Okay? It would say something like Caterpillar Diesel on the front here, then it would scrunch like that. Now why? I don't really know. We could speculate. Keep the cigarette dryer in the rain. Also, you could fold it up and put it in your back pocket in the Pentecostal tent. I don't know, but it was always like that. And then just below that, very few teeth, but just below that, there'd be a T-shirt. And it was not so much the slogan that was written on the T-shirt that identified this person as a member in good standing of this Get a Crowd. There was always some slogan under the oil stains and the coffee stains. You could see something written under there. It would say something like, Earth first. We'll lug the other planets later. Or hugger logger. You'll never go back to trees. Something like that. But it wasn't that. What was the big tip-off was it was the way the shirt was cut. It was the design. See, it was really tight around the neck, which was a reason for that. Let's face it, you can only make the neck of a T-shirt so big. Right? But from the neck area, it headed out at approximately this angle, okay, and it would crest right about here. And then just below that, there would be a navel about the size of a Dunkin' Donut. Okay, you've seen these fellas. And then just below that, there'd be a lifetime member NRA belt buckle attached to a set of Maine designer jeans with the crack in the back. They were popular all over the state of Maine. The clam diggers down east wear that same model. They call that the Dear Isle Smile. You see a lot of them on Route 1 in the summertime, let me tell you. But as I say, we very quickly ascertained that if we was only going to be performing strictly for the Skidder crowd, we had to change our repertoire rather dramatically, because at the time, the Dubious Brothers is what they used to refer to, some of you old enough remember this, as a top 40 band. I don't even know if they even have them anymore, but what it used to mean back then was we played the same songs you hear on the radio every day. You just don't recognize them right off. Okay? But we had to learn a whole new kind of music, and much to my surprise, there was only one type of music that the Skidder crowd had the slightest interest in, and here's the tip, it was not string quartets. No, as you might suspect, it was the country and western, but not any country. It was the old-fashioned, hardcore, heart-breaking, tear-jerking country. I don't know if you know this, but misery loves country. You don't think so? You don't think? It's yard sale season. I want you to go looking around the yard sales and get your a phonograph. Somebody will explain what it is. Got a little spindle sticking up there, and these things you turn things. And then you want to get some records. It's like a CD, only bigger. It's got a hole in there and it's black. You get some country artists. You know, Hank Williams, Hank Snow. If it says Hank, just buy it. You know? Okay, put it on the photograph, drop the needle on that, and what you want to do is play it backwards. You know what you get? You get your wife back, your job back, your dog back, your truck back. Misery loves country. So we had to learn all the country classics. How Can I Miss You When You Won't Go Away? That was popular. How Come You Believe Me When I Told You That I Loved You When You Knew I've Been a Liar All My Life? I've been so miserable since you've been gone, it seems like you never left home. We used to finish up on a Saturday night, great country classic, have them crying in their beer in 10 seconds flat. You want to keep the six-pack cold, put it next to my ex-wife's heart. It just struck a nerve. Quite likely the only nerve available at that hour. But we had our work cut out for us, and fortunately, we had a great singer-songwriter and a piano player by the name of Stephen Biker. Steve and I have been friends now, gosh, half century. And Steve was the piano player for the Dubious Brothers. He's the chief songwriter and keyboard player for the Wicked Good Band. And Steve got the unenviable task of writing a love ballad for the Skidder crowd. You can imagine, that was a bit of a disconnect. But I'm going to finish up with this song, finish up the first set. We're going to take a brief intermission so you can, well, you don't have to, you can do anything you want, really, but you might want to. They opened up the privy. So, but here's the thing. I know how it gets. You're having a good time, you've been laughing, you're relaxed, and here comes the guitar, and I'll walk along like this, and you're going to get this urge to sing along. Do me a favor and be quiet, because it throws me off, frankly. This is a love ballad for these Skinner crowds. Wicked good. I love you, darling, wicked good. You start a fire in my heart. It's burning hot because you're wicked child. I love you, sweetheart, wicked child. Even when I first met you down the old K-line, I fell in love with you because you're a wicked child. Well, I've been halfway around the world and halfway back again, from Paris, Maine to West Paris. You're the cunningest girl that I've ever seen. Why don't you take me down to the used car lot and buy an escort? Wicked good. Oh, I believe our romance is going to be wicked good. But just like fried smelts, you're my favorite food. Breakfast, lunch, and dinner, wicked good. Well, I've been halfway around the world and halfway back again, from Paris, Maine to Paris, France. And you're the cutest looking girl that I've ever seen. Why don't you take me down to that Grange Hall dance? Oh, wicked good. I bet our marriage will work out wicked good. Because even when our teeth fall out, it's understood. They'll be chattering away, wicked good. Thank you. I'll be back in a few minutes. I do have some of my latest book, Answers to Questions Nobody Was Asking, that just came out a couple of years ago. It's already a million seller. We've got a million of them down sellers, so we do appreciate it after this record. I also have some copies of the great that story Drunken Fireworks that Steve King wrote, and I narrated for Simon Schuster. It's very funny. It's a 2 CD story, and if you ever thought that Steve King wasn't a funny guy, you should listen to that. I'll be back in a few minutes. Everybody having a good time? We're having a wonderful time, and I very much appreciate coming back to Pittsfield. I have so many wonderful memories. You know, I heard today at the dedication down by the railroad station, Pete Faggy was talking, and you know, another great memory I have here is back in 1983. I'd had my office on Main Street for 2 or 3 years, and I kept going in the Pittsfield Public Library. And every time I'd go in there, I'd say, gee, you got this beautiful dome up here. Somebody ought to paint a mural up there. And then one time I went in, they had a new library, and she'd just gotten to work there. And I said, you ought to have somebody paint a mural up there. She said, we got some of your books here that you did the illustrations, right? And I said, yeah. She said, so you're an artist, right? And I said, yeah. She said, why don't you do it? Then I realized, oh, maybe I got myself in over my head. And I said, well, I can't do that. She said, why? I said, well, if you notice, there's a leak up there. The plastic was all kind of falling apart once. I said, I can't do it because of the leak up there. Well, pretty soon she called up Chimbro, and Chuck said, sure, we'll go down there, we'll fix that. So that was gone. Then I said, well, I can't do it. And they said, why? And they said, because I don't have the art supplies to do that. And they called up Barry's Stationers down in Waterville, and they got all the art supplies. And I said, well, it's up there. I said, I can't work on the ladder. And then some other company put up all the staging. And every time I put up a resistance, they solved the problem. So For 4 months, I got a key to the library, and I went in and painted. If you know that all the characters that are in there are all people from town, and the little girl who's being read to in the rocking chair is my daughter Stephanie, who was a year and a half old when that picture was taken, and she'll turn 39 in December. And so I always have a fond place in my heart for Pittsfield, Maine, and it's wonderful to come here. It's wonderful to see the town prospering. But I have to tell you, in all these years of being a Maine humorist, I've had some great and interesting experiences. In 1996, in August, I had an office in Bath, Maine. The telephone rang, and my secretary said, "It's Charles Perrault on the phone." I said, "I'm sure." I thought I had people that have funny voices and play practical jokes, but it was actually Charles Perrault. He said he was coming to Maine, writing a book, and he wanted to interview me for the book. Well, who was I to say no? I was a big fan of Charles Perrault, and he came to my house and talked to me for 2 hours. After he finished up, he walked out my front door, stood on the steps, lit up the Pall Mall, and said, "I don't suppose you'd consider coming to work for me at CBS News." And I said, "Charles, I think I could probably clear the schedule." So he set up a film crew. I did 2 audition tapes, and on October 26, 1996, my first postcard from Maine aired nationwide to an audience of about 3 or 4 million people on the CBS network. And over the next 11 years, I had the great privilege of covering the state of Maine for the network, and that means my friend of mine flew to Paris, France, and his jet lag got into a hotel room and turned on the TV, and I was on the TV. He said, "What are you doing on the TV in Paris, France?" I said, "If they got CBS, I'm there." So it was really exciting. But the funny thing about it was, that was like a dream come true. But you find out when your dreams come true, the ramifications of those dreams aren't always what you expected. And I thought if I spent 11 years on a network television show, I would become a household name or something. And actually what really happened was I became, and I remain to this day, a persistent, nagging national rumor. And this is what happens. It usually happens in airports, not always in airports. It happens at some public place. It might be the Miami Metro Zoo, it might be somewhere else. But I was out in Missoula, Montana, not too long ago, and somebody will come up to me, and what happens is, because when you're on television like that, it never ends. It's on YouTube. So people will walk by, and then they do a double take. And then they poke their friend, and then they look again, and then they come over and say, "Are you the guy from Maine?" That's what they always say. I said, "Well, there's a couple other guys up there." But they actually sent me out for a quart of milk, so I gotta go be back there pretty quick. But then they tell me all this stuff about Maine. They've never been to Maine, and they fell in love with Maine. And one of the things that they'll tell me is they'll say, "Do people really talk like that up in Maine?" And I say, "Yes, not only do they talk like that," and they do. People say the accent is disappearing. I say, "You're going to the wrong places." Go down to the co-op at Booth Bay Harbor at about 6 o'clock in the morning on a Tuesday morning. This is what it sounds like. "Well, here's a now. Hell, you're going to hell. You can't even tell what they're saying. You just hear all accents. There's hardly any words." But in addition to that, we have a wonderful tradition, a part of our Maine culture, and I'm hoping to work with Governor Mills' office for the bicentennial of the state to put this in the forefront somewhere along the line. The oral tradition is what folklore is called. These wonderful stories. And what makes Maine humor is something very particular. For one thing, it's almost never mean-spirited or angry or, putting somebody down. It tends to be kind of philosophical. It's very dry. As my friend Kendall Morrison, the storyteller, says, it takes more than a teaspoonful of brains to understand it. You've got to be kind of paying attention, or you might miss some of it. But it also tends to have a bit of a perspective that you might learn a little lesson. Kind of blowing up a breeze here. So what we have is stories that have been told along the coast and in the hunting camps and around the state of Maine, sometimes for 5 or 10 or 15 generations. So let me just tell you, if we have a story that was told in 1919 and is still being told in 2019, maybe it was told in 1819, the point is those stories exist. And if you think about all the changes that have happened today and in our culture, and yet those stories still resonate, I think they have something to tell us. And a lot of these stories, I'll get into that later, but one of the ones is a good example is, you know, I've always said the cardinal sin, you can be anybody you want to be and come to Maine and do just fine as long as you don't commit the cardinal sin. People say, what's the cardinal sin? I said, thinking that being from away makes you better than the local people. That's the kiss of death. And it doesn't matter if you try to pretend not to think that. If you think it, we will know it. That's all. It'll come through in some way. So there's a great story that takes place in Bar Harbor back at the turn of the 19th and 20th century. So it was around 1915, somewhere in that era. And in those days, you had families, mostly from Philadelphia, New York, like that part of the Pacific Coast, the East Coast, that would come for the whole summer to Maine. And they had some, quote, cottage up in Bar Harbor that had 15 bedrooms, some gigantic place. And typically, and my uncle was one of these people, there's a lot of people, especially down on the coast, their whole job is being, look at it, right over there. But there's people that their whole job is to be a caretaker for other people's property. My uncle, Steve, lived his whole life, never owned a house. He always took care of other people's houses. And that's a very respected way to make a living. And there's always a sense of respect between the people that own the houses and their caretakers. And many times this relationship lasts a lifetime. So there's one of these houses, and the old fella who was the head of the family and the old caretaker were of a similar age. They were in their 80s. Well, and they've been going that way for decades. Well, this one year, everything changed. The head of the family passed away, and his young daughter come up from Philadelphia and was, as was the case in those days, he met her at the station in the old Model T flivver. He unpacked everything off the train, and he would drive her to the house, and then he would do all the errands and do all the paint the shed and fix the boathouse and do all that stuff all summer, and drive her back at the end of the summer and give her a bill. So it was a beautiful day. He picked her up at the train station, loaded all the stuff on the Model T, turned to her and said, "Nice day, ain't you?" She looked at him, kind of like a pit bull eyes a piece of meat. She looked at him and she says, "I pay you to do my chores. I do not pay you to have a conversation with me." Well, so noted. He went the whole summer, did all the work that was allotted to him, never said one more word to her for the entire summer. At the end of the summer, Labor Day weekend, he packed everything up in the trucks, took her back to the train station. The chauffeur was there to greet her and take everything. And he presented a bill to her for the work he'd done all summer. She went through that bill with a fine-tooth comb, every item. There was an item, and then that was the cost of it, paint the boathouse,
Let me on
all that. Got down to the bottom of the bill.
I'll be tomorrow.
And there was an item, there was no distinction what it was about. It was just a $20 charge. Well, she got right hand up. She said, "What, may I ask, is that $20 charge on there for?" He said, "That, dear, is for sass. I don't often take it when I do my charge for it." But you see,
What's that?
it's also...
He hasn't bothered you tonight?
There's a point to a lot of these Maine stories. Another thing that is a common element in the Maine storytelling canon is a lot of times the funniest stories come out of the difficult circumstances, because I think what our forebears understood in a way that we sometimes forget is that sometimes the most dangerous thing you can do in a difficult situation is take yourself too seriously. A sense of humor can lubricate some difficult truths and allow you to laugh at things, and that allows you to process that information. So you'll notice on the Maine state seal, there's a mariner and there's a lumberjack. There's a moose there too. There'll be Allen's coffee, brandy, and whoopie pies eventually, but right now that's all we got. But it's worth noting, it's not a coincidence that the most enduring stories come from these two lines of work, what we call working on the water and working in the woods. And these are dangerous, difficult occupations, and those are the occupations that oftentimes the best and the funniest stories come from. So one of the other situations that Kendall Morse, I mentioned earlier, Ken is a friend of mine, a great storyteller, made a number of records for Folkways Records, and he came from Machias. And he knows a lot of these old time stories. And back in the age of sail, there were ships coming out of Maine shipyards, and they were manned by whole crews of Maine sailors, and they go all over the world. They go up and down the coast, they go around Cape Horn, they go over to the west coast. Before the Panama Canal was the age of sail. And Ken tells the story. One of these ventures, and there's a bunch of Maine sailors on a Maine-built ship, they're taking lumber from Maine over to California or something like that. They get down to the Falkland Islands and off of Argentina, and a hurricane comes up. It's hurricane season, and before they can even reach the sails are in tatters. Of course, you have to understand, they had no auxiliary power, no GPS, no nothing, and they were bailing by hand, and it was getting ahead of them, and then the seams were opening up. Well, becoming a certain point of them clear, they were going to have to go down with the ship. So the captain called all the sailors up on the deck, explained the situation, says, boys, we're going down with the ship, nothing I can do. He said, we're going to abandon the lifeboats, but just for a moment, if there's anybody here that has any religion, if they know a prayer or a Bible verse or anything, you can imagine these were hard-bitten old sailors, they not likely they'd have a lot of spiritual life going on there. But one of them says, well, Captain, I grew up in Lewiston, right next to the cathedral, my childhood. He says, I suppose I could probably remember a few things. He said, that's good enough. He says, all heads was bowed. And right at that moment, the wind, they must have had the eye of the hurricane, because the wind seemed to die right down. Suddenly it was calm, quiet. Just for a moment, you'd hear a pin drop. This fellow raised his hand. He says, under B-17. but also my friend Kendall Morse, Joe Parham, Ken was one of the Joe Parham is another great storyteller. He passed away a few years ago, but Joe did great stories about hunting and fishing, and around that same time, in the turn of the century, there were these camps, lumbering camps that were up in the Great North Woods, and lumber was king. But this was a hard job. There were no diesel engines. There were just teams of oxen. They burned wood, and they did everything by hand saws and axes. And it was a brutal way to make a living, but it was a way to make a living. And a lot of people did it. But there was a trick to it. And one of the tricks was the worst job in the camp was the job of being the cook. People think, what's so hard about being a cook? Well, it isn't that hard, except the problem is you've got to do all the other work, and you've got to cook on top of that. So you've got to cook 3 meals a day, and you don't get off of any of the other stuff. So it runs people right into the ground. So they take the youngest, dumbest guy who's never been on a crew, and they make him the cook. And to seal the deal, everybody knows that the only rule is if you complain about the food, you become the cook. Okay, so only one guy goes crazy. Everything works out pretty good there for that one season. Well, so this fellow took on the job as cook, so 3 times a day, and it was just basic stuff, beans and brown bread, and maybe a little fatback bacon or something like that, black coffee and blueberry pie, pretty much 3 meals a day, but somebody had to cook that stuff. So he got up in the morning, he went and he cooked breakfast, then he went up and worked in the woods until noon, then he came in and cooked lunch, and he did the same thing for dinner. So long about bug season, after he'd done that all winter long, he was just about out of his mind with fatigue, and he was just ready to drop, and he was out in the woods, getting ready, he already cooked breakfast, already cooked lunch, getting ready to go cook dinner, and he had an epiphany. He stepped over a log. You know what a cow flop looks like? Yeah. Well, a moose flop is very similar, only larger. and he stepped over this log and he put his foot in this moose flop, and he had an idea. He got a burlap sack and he tucked that moose flop in there, and he went in and he says, "This is the last night I'm cooking for these guys," because he was making pies, and he made 18 pies. 17 of them was blueberry pies, and one of them was not blueberry. Okay? And so the lumberjacks came in, they were just about starving from working all day, and out went the beans, and they scarfed down the beans, and the brown bread, and the bacon went out, and the black coffee by the gallon, and at the end of the meal, out come the pies. 18 pies in all, 17 blueberry, one which was not blueberry. And the one which was not blueberry, as luck would have it, landed right in front of Big Chink, the toughest guy on the, about 6.5 feet tall, 250 pounds, solid muscle, mean as an alley cat. He dug into that pie, took a big mouthful. Well, the fork went one way, the plate went the other way, the table went up, and he was looking around with murderous intent. And he looked out in the kitchen. He could see through the window there where the cook was in there. And he looked right at him. He says, "That is moose flop pie. Good though." But of course, there's no discussion of down East Maine humor could possibly be complete without mentioning two men who met on the campus of Yale University. They had actually known one another before they went to school, but they got together as young men at the Yale campus, and in 1958 they shared a great love for storytelling. And of course I'm talking about Marshall Dodge and Robert Bryan. And Bobby Marshall had not been to Maine, but his family had been to Maine. Bobby had been to Maine every summer up to Tunk Lake in Hancock County ever since he was a little kid, and they were in love with these wonderful Maine stories, these traditional stories. So they decided to get together and record this album called Bert and I and Other Stories from Down East Maine. And that album, it's hard to really overstate the importance of that album, because it came out in 1958 and it put Maine humor on the map. If you remember the 50s, everything that was old was no good. It was going to throwing the baby out in the bathroom. They knocked down all the great buildings and everything else that they're putting up. But this was a way, this album, in and of itself, just basically said, this is wonderful stuff. You should pay attention to this. Now, anybody can put out an album, and they did back then, and you might sell, it's just like you could put out a YouTube video or a CD, and you might sell a couple to your aunt, your grandmother, your best friend, but that's, you can sell a few dozen, and that's what people did. This record came out in 1958. They took 100 of them down to the Harvard Coop. They sold in a day. They printed up another 100 they sold. They printed 200. This is all, they never had an advertising campaign. They never had a big label. It's sold by word of mouth. And from 1958 till, see, we did the 2008, we did, Bobby and I did the 50th anniversary. At that point, it sold 1.3 million copies. Just word of mouth. So some of you know I was working with Marshall Dodge in 1981. Marshall was killed by a hit-and-run drunk driver in Hawaii at the age of 45. Terrible tragedy. And Bob Bryan and Bob approached me, and I recorded my first album for the Bert and I label in 1982, and I recorded 5 albums between now and then, including I've got one called Bert and I Rebooted, which features me and Robert Bryan that we recorded to Bobby last year. But it was such an honor, such a privilege to know and work with both of those guys and to record in that tradition. And I'm going to finish up with a couple of the best stories from that early period. And one of them, like I say, a lot of the humor, when you laugh, you open up pores, you open up the new you laugh at something, the information comes in. And a lot of times the humor is our way of coming to terms with difficulty and tragedy, and both these stories have something about that. And one of them that was on that first album, it goes like this. Bert and I was clamming down on the flat last Saturday morning. when we run across the body in the kelp. We thought it might have been old John, the lighthouse keeper. And we went up, knocked on the door. John, you in there? Didn't hear nothing. He knocked again. John, hold on, boys, I'm coming. John comes to the door. We was down at the flat clamming when we run across a body in the kelp. We was wondering if it was you. A body in the kelp? Oh yeah. Well, let me ask you boys a question. Was he wearing blue trousers? Yeah, they was blue trousers. Red shirt? Oh yeah, definitely a red shirt, first thing I noticed. Green suspenders? Yeah, he had them green suspenders on for sure. Rubber boots? Yeah, he had rubber boots all right. Was they high boots or low boots? Well, let me think. I believe they was low boots. Are you sure? Well, come to think of it, they was high boots turned down low. Well then, it wasn't me. But my favorite of all the Bert and I stories, and I learned this from Marshall Dodge, and he told me that he got it from a fellow by the name of Alan Beavers. Whoever Alan got it from, I don't know. But it's probably one of the oldest stories in the Maine storytellers canon. And I can tell you this, I have told this story from Maine to California. I told it at the Mall of America, Minnesota, down to the Florida Keys, up to the upper peninsula of Michigan, and there's something about this particular story that is the essence of Maine humor. And it seems to travel very well. And it goes something, but not exactly like this. Bert and I was heading fishing this one summer. Pretty good summer. Fishing wasn't that good, but the weather was nice and it kept us from the tourists along the shoreline. Bert seemed to arrive down at the dock each morning, just bursting with enthusiasm to go fishing. Well, you know that wasn't like this. And after a few days of this, I began to question the source of his motivation. Well, he didn't really want to talk about it, but I poked a little bit and I prodded, and finally he allowed us out. The reason he was so anxious to spend the whole day out on the water fishing was that his mother-in-law was in. Now, please don't misunderstand me. I have nothing against mothers-in-law as a general category. I really don't. I have had several marvelous mother-in-laws over the years. And I believe in the old adage, behind every successful man, there is a surprised mother-in-law. But I have to know this one individual. There's quite a case. For one thing, she was an exceptionally large woman, and personally, I prefer somebody that is built along them lines. I don't care if them skinny girls, you see them on the magazine covers, their cheeks is all caved in, half their clothes hanging off of them. Lord, they wouldn't make it through February. But she was a good, solid, heavy-set girl, and I believe somebody built along them lines is shade in the summer and warmth in the winter. But in addition to her physical bulk, she had a propensity for verbalization. It was awesome. That woman could talk the varnish of a canoe paddle before she even warmed up. And I have personally watched her talk all day long at 90 miles an hour with gusts up to 120. Now, she was a woman of whom it might well be said she was all right in a small dose. The trouble was nobody had figured out how to get a small dose. Well, it was the last day of her visit. She was planning on heading back down to Massachusetts that afternoon. And Bert arrived at the dock that morning. I don't know as I have ever seen anybody any happier than Bert was that day. He come down the dock, he was grinning like a dog eating bumblebees. And he went to the boathouse, He got the gear up the boathouse. He tossed the gear aboard, popped aboard, loosed the bow line, loosed the stern line. He just about ready, loosed the springer. And all at once I heard a groan out of there. Like a moose in heat. And I looked up in the direction he was looking, and I seen just what he seen. There wasn't no doubt about it. It was her car. Big Oldsmobile 98, Massachusetts plates. All the shock absorbers on the driver's side was shot to hell. Down she come, over that hill with a cloud of dust behind her, and that big beefy arm flailing out the window, hollering at the top of her lungs, bound and determined that she was going to go fishing. Well, wasn't nothing we knew about it. She'd already seen us. We was a captive audience. We made the boat fast, walked up the ramp, walked over to the car, opened the driver's side door, pried her out as best we could. Bert managed to get a pretty good purchase on one end of her, and I buckled on the other. Somehow we managed to maneuver her down over the ramp. We loaded her aboard, centered her best we could. Of course, you got to realize the whole time she was just yabbering away of loose tricks, eh? Let's put it this way. Anybody that could have left already did. Even the seagull that cleared out. We truly was a captive audience, and Bert went to work cranking up that old one lung, making, breaking. Wicked big flywheel on them suckers, you know. We gotta go. We headed out towards the mouth of the harbor. The inner harbor that morning was glassy smooth. Just a little sea smoke going up, she's yabbering away. But as we entered into the open ocean, we encountered just a little mite of heavy water. Nothing serious, you understand. One more than an 8 to a 10-foot ground swell, I'd say. But you know, right about that same moment, Bert's mother-in-law dropped down several decimals. And I knowed her the better part of 20 years. I've never known her to go in that direction. And I took that as a sign. Sure enough, a few minutes later I glanced over. She was looking mighty green around the gills. And I don't believe it was 30 seconds after that she was up over the gunnel with an awful load of chop. So you could tell it was going to be a long day of fishing. And by the time we got out where we was going, why, she was feeling mighty poorly. Naturally, we done the best we could to make her just as comfortable as possible. We laid her down in the bilge. You've got to understand that was a 22-foot open mahogany lap stretch boat with a well and the engine in there, but it's open, and it wouldn't really swell up. It was early in the season, so the seams won't swell up like they would be later. So quite a bit of seawater was seeping in. You know, we put her down in the bilge, make her comfortable. The seawater was seeping in, and we was hand lining for haddock. In them days, you could catch a pretty good-sized haddock. They're just a few miles offshore. So by and by, she had settled into a pattern to where she's kind of sloshing and moaning. And, like that. And you know, after a while, you just get used to it. You really do. You know, you kind of, after a while, it was just like the background music down at the Walmart. You don't even know what it's on. So I can't tell you exactly what happened, but apparently we was hand lining for haddock. She was washing and moaning, and apparently a wave must have come along, you see, and smuck us on the starboard side, just as she was on the upslosh. And up she sailed, right straight down, slick as a cup of coffee. No, I was surprised. I really was. I would have thought that a woman with that amount of girth would have had at least a little mite, a built-in flotation. No, sir. By Godfrey, down she went, just like a stone. And it was obvious the minute it happened, there wasn't nothing we knew about it. So we kept fishing. And along towards the end of the afternoon, we hauled in the line, stowed the gear, headed back to Harper, made port along 4:30, 5 o'clock, somewhere in there, run the boat over the dock, unloaded the gear, stowed the gear in the boathouse, run the boat back out on the mooring, made sure the boat was fast, run the tender back in the dock, made sure the tender was fast, run the oars and the oar walks up the tender, made sure they were stowed in the boathouse, and then of course, run right off to call it walk. Well, she was upset. Well, she was. Anybody would be, but we explained there wasn't nothing we knew about it. It didn't matter to her. She got all head up. Got on the telephone. She called all the relatives, all over the country. They were spread out. They got upset, and they all jumped in their cars and drove up to Maine. Well, a few days later, when they was all up at Bert's house, and they were in the same place at the same time, they realized there wasn't nothing they knew about it either. So they sat around, ate casserole for a few days. Somebody struck upon the idea of having a memorial service. So Bert's wife arranged that. I guess he went down with the kids, said it was a nice service. She had no religious affiliation. They had to rent a preacher. I didn't know you could get there, so you can. And apparently you could. You remember the name for it, Hans, his long name. And nice flowers, nice music. No casket. Probably a considerable savings on the package right there. But anyway, the whole thing is pretty well blown over. Got back to normal. A couple of weeks gone by. The Tuesday morning, about 5 o'clock, Bert and I was down at the co-op. One of the boys from the co-op come up. He come over. He says, "You remember that heavy set girl that was out here